Edward Elric is one of the greatest protagonists in anime because his story is not simply about becoming stronger. In fact, Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood does something far more interesting with him. It makes Edward powerful from the beginning, then spends the entire series teaching him that power was never the answer. He's a genius, a prodigy, the youngest state alchemist in Amastris, and one of the few people alive capable of performing alchemy without a transmutation circle. But the deeper tragedy is that Edward's entire journey begins because he believed intelligence could overrule reality. At his core, Edward is a character born from love, guilt, arrogance, and responsibility. He and Alphonse do not commit human transmutation because they are evil, they do it because they are children who cannot accept grief. That is what makes their sin so human. Edward does not try to revive his mother out of ambition, but out of desperation. He believes that if alchemy is a science, then death must be a problem with a solution. And that is his first philosophical failure, confusing knowledge with wisdom. This is why Edward's arc is so powerful. He begins as a boy who thinks the universe can be negotiated with. Equivalent exchange tells him that if he pays the right price, he should receive the right result. But human life does not work that cleanly. Grief does not follow math. Love does not balance neatly on a scale. Edward's missing arm and leg and Alphonse's missing body are permanent reminders that understanding a law does not mean you understand its meaning. Edward's personality reflects this wound constantly. He is loud, angry, impulsive, sarcastic, and ridiculously easy to provoke, especially about his height. But underneath all that noise is a boy who hates feeling helpless. His temper is not just comedic relief, it's a defensive mechanism. Edward snaps because anger gives him motion. If he is yelling, fighting, or moving forward, he does not have to sit still with guilt. And guilt is the engine of his character. Edward does not simply want to restore Alphonse because he loves him, he wants to restore him because he sees Al's condition as his fault. Even though both brothers participated in the transmutation, Edward carries the burden more aggressively because he sees himself as the older brother, the genius, the one who should have known better. That older brother guilt defines nearly every decision he makes. He risks his body, career, morality, and future because he believes Alphonse paid the price for Edward's arrogance. This is also why Edward's morality is so striking. He lives in a brutal world filled with military corruption, genocide, human experimentation, and philosophical monsters who reduce people to ingredients. Yet Edward refuses to use a philosopher's stone once he understands what it's made from. That refusal is not weakness, it's the entire thesis of his character. Edward is surrounded by people who justify atrocities through outcome. Save the country, gain immortality, create power, win the war. Edward rejects that logic. He refuses to treat human lives as fuel, even when doing so would solve his greatest problem. Philosophically, Edward is the answer to the central question of Fullmetal Alchemist: what separates human beings from tools? Father, the homunculi, the corrupt military all view people as resources. Bodies can be harvested, souls can be trapped, nations can be sacrificed. Edward, despite all his flaws, refuses to cross that line. He learns that science without ethics becomes monstrosity. Knowledge is not evil, but knowledge without humility is catastrophic. His alchemy reflects this perfectly. Edward's ability to clap his hands and transmute without a circle makes his fighting style fluid, reactive, and incredibly versatile. Unlike Roy Mustang, who specializes in flame alchemy, or Armstrong, whose alchemy is tied to his family's combat style, Edward is a generalist. He can reshape terrain, create weapons, repair objects, form shields, alter structures, and improvise mid-fight. His greatest strength is not raw destructive power, it's adaptability. Edward fights like a problem solver. He reads the environment, identifies the materials, turns whatever is around him into an advantage. Stone floors become pillars, metal surfaces become blades, broken structures become traps. His alchemy is fast, clever, and aggressive, matching his personality perfectly. He does not fight like someone executing a prepared technique. He fights like someone arguing with reality until it gives them a useful answer. But this is also where Edward could have used his abilities more efficiently. For someone as brilliant as he is, Edward often fights too emotionally. He rushes in, relies heavily on close-range combat, and frequently lets anger longer determine his tempo. This makes sense psychologically. Edward wants to personally confront problems, but tactically, he should have leaned harder into battlefield control. His alchemy gives him one of the best zoning abilities in the series. He could create layered terrain, forced movement paths, collapsing floors, restraining walls, and environmental traps before enemies ever get close. A more efficient Edward would treat every battlefield like a chessboard instead of a boxing ring. For example, Edward could use alchemy to create pressure-based traps beneath enemies' feet, instantly raising spikes, walls, or restraints when they move. He could transmute dust clouds to obscure vision, reshape sound-reflective surfaces to confuse opponents, or create fake openings that bait enemies into predictable paths. Against physically superior opponents, he should avoid direct clashes and instead constantly alter footing, range, and visibility. Edward's best combat style should not be hit harder, it should be make the enemy fight in a world that changes every second. He could also make better use of prepared materials. Edward often relies on whatever is nearby, which is impressive but risky. If he carried specialized metal pellets, mineral dust, wire, chalk compounds, or compact transmutable tools, he could massively increase his options. Small pieces of metal could become restraints, powdered minerals could become flash barriers or hardening agents. Portable material kits would make him more dangerous in environments where natural resources are limited. His automail also has more potential than he usually uses. Edward commonly transmutes his automail arm into a blade, which is iconic but limited. He could modify it into hooks, clamps, shields, spring-loaded impact tools, or conductive surfaces depending on the opponent. If he worked more closely with Winry from a combat engineering perspective, his automail could become a modular weapon system. Not flashy for the sake of flashiness, but practical, different forms for capture, defense, mobility, and disarming. That said, Edward's inefficiency is part of what makes him human. He does not fight like a detached tactician because he is not detached. His flaws are emotional, not intellectual. He knows better, but knowing better is not the same as being calm enough to act better. This is one of the most realistic parts of his writing. Edward is a genius, but he is still a teenager with trauma, pride, and a desperate need to fix what he broke. His ideals evolve beautifully across the series. At first, Edward believes in equivalent exchange almost religiously. It gives structure to his pain. If the world is governed by exchange, then maybe his suffering can be reversed with the correct payment. But by the end, Edward realizes equivalent exchange is not enough to explain human connection. People give without receiving. People sacrifice without calculation. Love does not always balance. Mercy does not always produce reward. Humanity is not a transaction. This is why the ending is so perfect. Edward defeats truth not by overpowering it, but by surrendering his gate of truth, his alchemy itself, to bring Alphonse back. This is the ultimate reversal of his beginning. As a child, Edward tries to use alchemy to overcome human limitation. As a young man, he gives up alchemy to affirm human limitation. He finally understands that being human means accepting that you cannot have everything. That decision is one of the most philosophically mature endings in shonen. Edward does not become a god. He does not transcend the system. He does not unlock the ultimate power. He gives up power, and in doing so, he wins. His design ties directly into all of this. Edward's red coat is loud, dramatic, and instantly recognizable. Red suggests passion, danger, blood, and defiance, all central to his personality. The flammel-like symbol on his coat connects him visually to alchemical tradition, transformation, and the pursuit of forbidden knowledge. But the coat also makes Edward look bigger than he is. It creates an image of confidence, almost theatrical bravado, covering a small body marked by enormous loss. His short stature matters symbolically too. Edward hates being called small because he already feels small in the face of what he failed to control. His height insecurity is funny, but it also reflects his deeper fear that he's not enough. Not enough to save his mother, not enough to protect Al, not enough to fix everything. His oversized personality compensates for a body and soul that feel permanently lacking. The automail is even more important. Edward's metal arm and leg are visual reminders that his body has become a record of his mistake. He literally carries the cost of his arrogance. But automail also represents adaptation. Edward is not restored to his original state. He learns to move forward with replacements, scars, and limitations. His body becomes a philosophical statement. Healing is not always returning to what you were. Sometimes healing is learning to live honestly with what remains. His braid also adds to his design. It gives him a youthful, almost rebellious look while also connecting him visually to his mother and brother through softness. Edward wants to look tough, but his design never lets him become purely hardened. There's always warmth underneath the sharpness. So what if Edward accepted the Philosopher's Stone? He could have restored Al much earlier, but he would have destroyed the moral foundation of his journey. Edward using human lives to fix his mistake would mean he learned nothing from human transmutation. He would become another version of father, someone who sees people as material for personal completion. What if Edward never lost his alchemy? He would likely continue researching, traveling, and helping people, but the ending would lose its spiritual weight. Giving up alchemy forces Edward to become more than his talent. It proves that his identity was never his power. He is still Edward Elric without alchemy because his real strength was always his will, love, and moral clarity. What if Edward had been less impulsive and more like Alphonse? He might have avoided some danger, but he also might not have pushed forward when others froze. Edward's recklessness is dangerous, but it's also the reason he breaks through impossible situations. His fire is both flaw and gift. The goal was never to extinguish it, but to temper it. In the end, Edward Elric is not great because he's the smartest alchemist or the strongest fighter. Some people think he has to have a winning record to be amazing as a protagonist, and I entirely disagree. He is great because he changes. He begins as a child who believes the universe owes him an answer. He ends as a young man who understands that some losses cannot be undone, only honored. Edward's greatest victory is not defeating father, it's realizing that he does not need to become something beyond human to make things right. He only needs to be human properly, flawed, responsible, loving, humbled, and brave enough to give up power for the person he loves. Edward Elric starts the story trying to resurrect the dead. He ends it by finally learning how to live. Thanks for watching the video. If you have any anime characters you'd like me to analyze, drop them down in the comments below. You already know. JV out!